Hello everyone and welcome back to Mach 1 Mindset. Today we're diving into AP US Government and Politics 1.8 Constitutional Interpretations of Federalism. Now before we get started, please make sure you like, subscribe, and of course comment down below if you have any questions. Let's get into it. Federalism in the United States is not fixed. The Constitution outlines powers, but it does not settle every question. As a result, the Supreme Court has become one of the most important forces shaping federalism over time. Several constitutional clauses and amendments are central to these interpretations. The most important are the Necessary and Proper Clause, the Commerce Clause, the Supremacy Clause, the 10th Amendment, and the 14th Amendment. Let's start with the Necessary and Proper Clause. Located in Article 1, Section 8, this clause gives Congress the power to pass laws that are necessary and proper to carry out its enumerated powers. It is often called the Elastic Clause because it stretches federal authority beyond what is explicitly listed in the Constitution. This clause is the foundation of implied powers. For example, the Constitution does not mention a national bank, but Congress has created one using the Necessary and Proper Clause used to manage monetary policy. The Supreme Court strongly supported this interpretation in McCulloch v. Maryland in 1819. The court ruled that Congress could create a national bank and that states could not tax it. This decision expanded federal power and reinforced the idea of a national supremacy over the states. Next is the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment limits federal authority by reserving all powers not delegated to the national government to the states or the people. It is often cited by those who argue for states' rights in a more limited federal government. States frequently rely on the 10th Amendment when challenging federal involvement in areas like education, policing, or drug policy. For example, states that legalize medical marijuana often argue that drug regulation is not a power clearly given to the federal government. However, the 10th Amendment does not override other constitutional provisions. Its power depends heavily on how the courts interpret the federal authority elsewhere. That brings us to the Supremacy Clause. Found in Article 6, the Supremacy Clause establishes that the Constitution and federal laws take precedence over the state laws. When the state and federal laws conflict, federal law will win. The clause provides a clear rule for resolving disputes between levels of government. If a state refuses to comply with a valid federal law, the federal government can enforce compliance through the courts. The Supremacy Clause reinforces national unity, but it also limits states' independence when conflicts arise. Another key source of federal power is the Commerce Clause. The Commerce Clause gives Congress the authority to regulate interstate commerce. Over time, the court's interpretation of this clause has shifted dramatically. During the New Deal and the Great Society eras, the court interpreted the Commerce Clause broadly, allowing Congress to regulate economic activity that indirectly affected interstate commerce. This led to major expansion of federal power. However, in the United States v. Lopez in 1995, the court placed limits on this authority. It ruled that Congress could not use the Commerce Clause to ban guns in school zones because the activity was not economic in nature. This decision marked a shift back towards protecting state authority. Finally, we need to examine the 14th Amendment. Passed after the Civil War, the 14th Amendment fundamentally altered federalism. Its Due Process Clause and Equal Protection Clause allowed the federal government to protect individual rights against state actions. Using this amendment, the Supreme Court has struck down state laws that violate civil rights. A key example is Brown v. Board of Education, where the court ruled that racial segregation in public schools violated equal protection. The 14th Amendment greatly expanded federal power, especially in areas involving civil rights and liberties. Taken together, these clauses and amendments show that federalism is shaped by constitutional interpretation, not just constitutional text. The balance of power between states and the federal government changes based on court decisions, political parties, national crises, and evolving social values. Federalism is not static, it is an ongoing negotiation. Here's the key idea. The Supreme Court uses constitutional clauses to either expand or limit federal power, shaping the meaning of federalism over time.